All righty. I believe we are live. Wait, hold on. Uh, can you can you hear me? I don't know if anybody can hear me. Because my microphone might be set up wrong. If anybody's in the live chat, it would be appreciated if you could let me know if you can actually hear what I'm saying. All right, fantastic. Thank you, Jan. Um, how's it going? This is fun. This is the second time I've done this. Patreon live streams are. Oh, it's good to see. Oh, there's a few of you here. Fantastic. This is nice because I've done this once before. I do my plans to do these every 3 months for patrons of I think it's the $5 tier and above. So firstly, I've got to say thank you. If you're here, that means that you're a supporter of the channel, which is obviously I'm not going to bore you by telling you how grateful I am, but you know that it means a lot and allows me to do what I'm doing. The first one I did of these, because it is because it's like a patron only thing, and because only a few people can watch it at all, let alone people who can actually join live. There isn't like a whole lot. It's not like popping in the live chat or anything. Um, so this is generally speaking, like the idea of this was to kind of do like a Q&A thing with patrons, but because there aren't that many in the live stream usually, I'm still kind of forming what the live stream is. So I asked for some questions on Patreon a few days ago, which I actually should probably just get up and we just have a chat. But if if you want to ask any questions or anything, just stick them in the live chat. Or if you're watching after the fact, then welcome to. Just make sure you keep an eye on Patreon, see when the next live stream is going to be. Let me have a look. So I did a post asking for some questions, which I should answer. Okay, so this one's from, I think, Heli or Heli. I think it's Heli. Numbers of people affiliated to official religious organizations keep going down, but those are not equivalent to the number of people leaving faith behind and starting their secular skeptic journey. Many of them keep superstitious beliefs, join sects or esoteric movements. How can we reach those people? How can we improve critical, skeptical thinking, especially in young people? So this is an interesting point, actually. Okay, so people, a lot of the time, when people leave their official religion, when they leave their actual like doctrinal um, belief system, they will jump to atheism. This is something that I did when I left Roman Catholicism. I just became an atheist. That's what made me leave the faith. I started to think that God probably doesn't exist, and I ended up becoming an atheist, right? But some people don't do so, right? Some people throw off their religious faith but keep these superstitious attitudes, and we think, well, that's what can we do? What can we do about that? I'm just going to share the link again because it seems that everybody. But okay, so the question seems to be suggesting that it's a bad thing that these people are still holding superstitious beliefs even after leaving their religion. Now, it is in the sense that I don't beliefs. I want people to be skeptical. I want people to kind of give up ideas that don't have any real grounding. But the thing is, I think it might actually be a good thing if people do retain some kind of spirituality or some kind of religious inclination. Reason being, because what that shows is that you've had the skeptical thinking you need to throw off your religious belief. But that doesn't necessarily mean you should jump to atheism, right? When I realized that Roman Catholicism didn't hold up, I became an atheist. Is that the rational thing to do? Or should it be to get away from Roman Catholicism and think, well, what about Protestantism, right? What about Calvinism? Or what about Islam? What about Judaism? What about Hinduism? What about that kind of, and you kind of look at it from that perspective, right? If you jump straight to atheism, right? Although I think that's the correct kind of telos, that's the right end to get to eventually. If you jump there immediately, that suggests to me that you've read something about atheism, or you've read the God Delusion or something, and you thought, this is great, I'm an atheist now. When I think it requires more thought than that. Obviously, atheism is the default position, so it doesn't require thought and reflection to become an atheist. But if you are religious and you're specifically like rejecting a doctrine, uh, the point about skepticism is trying to be pedantic, trying to be specific, trying to be absolutely sure that every single part of a claim holds up. So we should be taking it a bit less wholesale, right? Don't just say, Noah's Ark didn't exist, so I'm not a Catholic anymore, and I'm an atheist. Like, take it bit by bit. Say, okay, so I don't like the transubstantiation of Catholicism. I don't like that bit, but I do like the God bit. That kind of might make sense, whatever. And before you know it, you're talking about Protestantism, and that's fine. So it's not a problem, is what I'm trying to say when people throw off their religious belief but keep a sense of spirituality. It just means that they're kind of one step along, right? And they might end up going and being religious in some other form, which is not what I'd want to do or want them to do, because I don't think that would be correct. But like, what matters is not where they end up, but that they end up wherever they do end up by a process of rational thought, right? That's the goal here. If somebody tells me they're a Christian and they give me a list of rational reasons why they are a Christian, then I disagree with them and I'll debate them about it. But I'll think, you know what, fair play. You know, you have reasoned yourself into a position. Now we can actually talk about philosophy, right? It's not just kind of, don't talk about my God like that. You know, my dad was an atheist and so was his dad before him, and it gets very emotional. If somebody is rational about it, then it's actually quite a good thing, because it leads to good discussion. So I don't think it's necessarily a problem. So, I mean, to answer the question about what to do about people who throw off their religious beliefs but keep the spirituality, just, I mean, find out what it was that made them throw off the religious organization in the first place. Like, think about what that was. Let's say maybe that was because they suddenly realized that authority needs to be questioned. And then you can just ask them about the authority of the Bible as a whole, or the authority of religion as a whole, or even if God exists, the authority of God. What uh, breadth should that have? Stuff like that. Just kind of ride the same train that moved them away from their official religious organization. Ride that train with them. Skepticism about religion in general. But if they don't want to do that, don't worry about it. They've still made a step in the right direction. And if somebody wants to be spiritual in their private life, if somebody still holds wacky beliefs, I couldn't care less. Honestly, like, I think you're wrong, but it's like if someone like has some belief that's totally wrong but has no effect on the world, like, I'd rather they believe the true thing. But like, I don't care. It doesn't affect me, right? But it's when it becomes public, and it's when you have an official religious dogma, that's when things become a problem, right? No problem with just personal spiritual belief. So for these people who've thrown off the religion but keep the spirituality, I don't think it's a massive problem. Um, okay, so Tal again. I think you'd pronounce it Tal. Tal Allback on Patreon has asked two questions. The first one is an interesting one. Okay, he says, I personally think that the problem of evil is enough to prove, at the very least tentatively, that the Abrahamic God doesn't exist. I heard you say more than once that you feel differently. Could you explain this? How can organized religion deal with it? So the problem of evil, first thing we need to note is that it comes in multiple forms. All right. So there's, broadly speaking, there's the logical problem of evil and the evidential problem of evil. The logical problem of evil is an argument that says, like, God does not exist, or at least a loving God, the Abrahamic God, whatever conception you have of this God does not exist. And the most famous proponent of that was J.L. Mackie. He wrote an essay called Evil and Omnipotence, basically making this case that was, as the name suggests, logical, right? This isn't just an inductive argument where you say this is quite a convincing thing. It's like, this is true. If this is a valid argument, and if the premises are true, the conclusion has to also be true. So the logical problem of evil is something like, if there is a loving God, well, premise one would be something like, a loving God, a truly loving God, would minimize suffering as much as possible, right? Would eliminate evil as much as it can. Premise two would be that any God worthy being of being called a God would be omnipotent, which means they do have the power to do anything. Therefore, right, if there is an all-loving God who is omnipotent, there cannot be suffering, because a good God would eliminate suffering, and God is omnipotent, and therefore, like, the conclusion just has to be suffering does not exist, right? But because suffering does not exist is obviously false, one of the premises has to be wrong, right? The premise that there is an all-loving, omnipotent God has to be wrong. Now, notice this isn't the same as how people generally put the problem of evil, which is when they just say, look at that kid with cancer, you know, how could a God allow that? Right? That's like a question. That's like convincing, right? That's not a logical case. That's not like, it's logically inconsistent for God to exist and this child to have cancer. It's an argument that, like, it seems to me that it makes less sense to believe that there's a God if kids have cancer than that there is one. Right? But it's not a logical case. That's the more common case that you hear. But the logical problem of evil actually makes a strong, strong case. So the question is, like, is it a good case, right? And I've said before that I don't like the problem of evil. I've somewhat changed my mind, right? Because reflecting on the depth of suffering, the reason I didn't like it before was because it's very easy for the religious, and we're talking philosophically here, right? It might sound stupid, but from a philosophical level, remember, if we're saying God does not exist, which the logical problem of evil does, it makes an active claim, God does not exist, then we have to defend that claim, right? And I think I've somewhat lost my train of thought, but uh, we actually have this burden of proof, right? So it's very easy. This is what I was going to say. So it's very easy for the religious to turn around and make a completely contrived and ridiculous argument in defense of their God allowing kids to have cancer, but like that's all they need to do, right? Because they don't need to prove that they don't need to prove the opposite. The burden of proof is on us, right? So I come along with the logical case, or I come along with the evidential case, and I say, why? How could God possibly allow children to have cancer? And the religious could just turn around and say, well, it's all part of a test to see if they'll get into the afterlife, or any suffering that they have in the real world will, or yes, as you say, Rusty Bike 5, God works in mysterious ways. They say something like that, right? And obviously, that's not very convincing, but like they can do the right. It's God, right? God can do whatever He wants. You can just say you won't understand it. Tough luck, right? That's the end of the argument, and that's why I never thought the problem of evil was a good argument, because it's impenetrable, right? There's no way for you to put it such that the religious can't respond. There can always be some kind of response, even if it is as stupid as God works in mysterious ways. Like that's all they need to do philosophically, because the burden of proof is not on them. That's why I didn't like it. But whereas the logical problem of evil, like I say, is trying to prove that God definitely does not exist, I think if we take the evidential problem of evil and admit when we make the argument, we say, listen, this doesn't disprove God, right? This isn't like the logical problem. I'm not saying that if this is all true, then God cannot exist. It's logically impossible. All I'm saying is that it seems unlikely, right? So think about the depth of human suffering, not just human suffering, but animal suffering as well. And I don't just mean the suffering that we inflict on animals. I mean in nature and throughout history as well. Like the human species as it evolved, all other species on the planet as they evolved, just the depth of suffering for these billions and billions of years. Um, for the theist to then come and say, well, listen, God has some kind of plan, right? We don't know it. It's mysterious, but I'm sure there's an answer. Then whereas previously I would have had to say, well, the burden of proof's on me, so fine, I'm going to have to prove why that's false, and I can't. But now I'm willing to just say, okay, well, let's leave it to the audience, right? Let's leave it to those who are listening, right? So you've got on the one hand this incredible, unthinkable depth of human suffering, and on the other hand, someone saying God works in mysterious ways, right? I can't prove which of those is the best response, but like you get to pick, right? Because I've realized that when it comes to actually making people adopt a philosophical position, oftentimes it's especially if it's as big as something about religion, it's less about having one knockdown argument that says you have to believe this. This proves the conclusion. If you accept this argument, then that's all you need. It's like here's one argument that kind of think about it, mull it over, like, and maybe you lean slightly one way or the other, and it's a cumulative case. It's like how Christians often make a cumulative case for God. They say the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't prove Christianity on its own. Of course not. But you've got the Kalam cosmological argument, and you've also got all the teleological arguments, and you've got the historical arguments for the resurrection of Christ, and you've got this and that, and you put it all together, and you've got a pretty strong case, right? The same thing can be done in reverse. So we can now say, and the reason now I now think that the problem of evil is a good thing to bring up is because it's just part of the puzzle, right? Because you can say to the person, listen, I think that the fact that the fact that like there is just unthinkable levels of suffering and completely unnecessary suffering happening every single day, every single hour, every minute is a good reason to think that maybe God doesn't exist, right? That's it. And if they say, but it's not, like you can't prove it, then I say, well, no, I can't prove it. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to say it's one part. And if they don't accept it, it's fine, right? It's only one part of the puzzle now, right? You can just say, okay, you don't accept that. Let's move on to the next thing. So I think it's a good argument in that respect. I just don't think it's a good argument in isolation as the logical problem of evil has it, which is to say, like this argument alone proves deductively, logically that God cannot exist. I think that that's probably not the most productive way to go about presenting the argument. Noise in the live chat. I always like trying to pronounce these names. Has asked what's my next podcast going to be about. Now, actually, it's a good opportunity to speak to patrons about this because the podcast. I really enjoy the podcast. I've taken something of a little break. Right, I've done 10 episodes, and I filmed quite a lot in one go, but I haven't been doing so recently. I've been uh, busy and not sending emails like I should be, chasing a few people up and things. But like, I really enjoy doing the podcast, right? It's been amazing. It's the reason I got this office space and this microphone equipment, and I've had some great conversations. And the people who have watched them have generally said that they've really enjoyed the podcast, and that means a lot. But I recognize that that's not what you all signed up for, right? Like when you pledge to support the channel, maybe you want to support the videos I make, but not the podcast, or maybe you're not interested in the podcast or don't listen to them. So I'd like to keep up the podcast, and I'm glad that there hasn't been like an insurgence or something, an insurrection of like patrons rising up and saying we didn't want this, we're all going to leave. That's promising, but I also don't want you to kind of like silently go, oh God, I don't want to support this, but I want to support the channel. So whatever, like let me know if it's something you want to support. So one thing that I do have lined up is not that long ago, uh, all the way from Dallas Fort Worth, Texas. Genetically modified skeptic Drew, my friend, was here, sat right in that chair. And next to him, all the way from Portsmouth, an hour on a motorbike, was Rationality Rules, Stephen Woodford, sat in the chair next to him. And it's the first time I've had more than one guest. So it was the three of us. And unlike when I'm talking to one of these like intellectuals, like Peter Singer or something, and I'm here like, God, this is very serious. We're having a very serious discussion about meta ethics. It was just the three of us. We're all friends, and we were just talking about what it's like to be on YouTube, what we think about the way we come across, the best way to argue these things, how like our different approaches and things, and just having a laugh with each other. So that was good fun. So I've got that to upload, and I hope that people enjoy it. But again, the reason I haven't done yet is because I didn't want to just upload podcasts. Right? I want to put some videos in between. But at the same time, I don't want to be sitting on video. Like I've got this content. I don't want to just sit on it just for the sake. Like if I have it, then I may as well put it out. But I don't want to just put out a bunch and everyone gets really sick of it. But that's why oftentimes I release them later than would be expected. Like I filmed the one with Stephen and Drew before I filmed the Richard Dawkins episode. But I uploaded the Dawkins one first because like that was more important to me, and I've just been sitting on the other one. But that should be coming out soon. Uh, if you have any recommendations, like do let me know. There are people who I'd like to reach out to, but you never know who's going to accept an invitation. I'd quite like to talk to Douglas Murray about his new book, The Madness of Crowds, which I've read a little bit of, and I think that like everyone's kind of praising him. Include even like the kind of liberal intellectuals, they say, oh, agree with him or not, Douglas Murray's great, and it's because he's in those circles and they want to be nice to him. I think he's an eloquent speaker and he's very funny and he argues his case very well. But some very specific things in the book, I feel like he's misrepresented a little bit. Like a lot of the book, there isn't in some parts of the book. It's not so much that he puts a big knockdown argument. He just gives like little examples of things that happen in culture. Like in the LGBT community or in the queer community, or how people are like trying to overexpress themselves and make it the basis of their identity, and how that's a bad idea, which I think I broadly agree with. But the way he's putting it forward, the specific examples were kind of routinely being a little bit misrepresented. Like there was a part in the book when he said it was something like there was some kind of gay media poll that said this percentage of the population identifies as gay, but the number is not high enough. And Douglas Murray goes, well, that raises the question: how high is high enough? Like, what you want there to be more gay people? Surely it doesn't matter. When like I went and checked the source, and what the source meant was that this is how many people are recorded and identify as gay, but the number's not high enough because there are more people who are gay and don't come out as such and can't let people know. So the records aren't accurate. That's what they meant. They meant the number, like the number isn't accurate, right? The number isn't high enough to be accurate with how many people are actually gay. But Douglas interpreted it to mean this many people are gay, and the number of people who are gay isn't high enough. And that would be ridiculous, but that was a misrepresentation. Now, the thing is, that's only a tiny little thing, right? That's nothing. So you just kind of like, you ignore it. You think, the rest of the book still stands. But the whole book is filled with these kinds of anecdotes. So, there's something to be said for making sure they're all accurate. So I'd love to talk to him. If I can get him on the podcast, that would be great. I'm not sure. One thing I was considering actually, this is a good. You guys, let me know what you think of this. I was thinking of getting or asking. I'm not sure if she'd do it, but my philosophy tutor at Oxford to come and do a podcast episode. I think it'd be fun because she's an incredibly talented and eloquent philosopher, but she's also just my tutor. So I think the dynamic would be quite fun. You'd get to see the kind of dynamic that we have when we're in a class or in a tutorial and we're talking about ideas. I think she's got a book coming out soon about like sexual philosophy and sexual politics, which could be fun to talk about. She specializes in feminist philosophy, that kind of stuff. I think it'd be fun to have a chat to her. Um, but that's more just because she's my tutor. I think it'd be fun to have my tutor sat next to me, and we could talk about like what it's like to learn philosophy and what it's like in class. If that's something you guys would like to see, I was thinking of reaching out to someone like Philosophy Tube, who is someone who wouldn't have a specific thing to talk about, but I think we just have an interesting like conversation that would roll on. But yeah, I'll speak to my philosophy tutor and see what she says. But who knows if she's actually up for that kind of thing? But she's great. Amir Srinivasan is her name. She's on. She's got a few books coming out that you can keep your eye out for. She's also on the shortlist for like the what is it, Scope Magazine's Thinkers of the Year or whatever that they do every year. So it was really weird. Like she was there. I think she was just above Greta Thunberg, and you can go and like vote for her to shortlist her. And I thought that was really cool. Like my philosophy tutor's on this shortlist for the best thinker in the world or whatever it is. So she's a good guest. I think that would be fun. But yeah, oh yeah, some people have said ContraPoints. ContraPoints has been recommended before. I think that would be fun. But again, I'm not sure what we talk about specifically. Maybe like the free speech video that ContraPoints put out a little while ago might be fun to talk about. We'll see. But yeah, there are lots of ideas. But if you have any suggestions, then do make sure that you let me know. Leanne, Lawrence Krauss did come to London recently, and I was emailing him. The thing was, he was only in London for like 2 days, and I said, "Well, you probably don't want to come to Oxford, do you?" And he said that would be a bit inconvenient. So I could have gone to London, but I didn't have a place in London, and I was kind of busy that weekend anyway, so I didn't get the chance to see him. It was really annoying because Lawrence Krauss was in London, and I could do one over Skype with him. I could do an episode with Lawrence Krauss on Skype, like I did with Michael Shermer or Armin Navabi, but it's just so much better to do it in person. So I might wait until I get another opportunity to see him in person before I do that, but we'll see. Um, oh, okay, so Jan, I'd assume many slash most patrons are interested in the skeptic part more than the underlying philosophy part. I myself am more interested in philosophy, specifically epistemology. Well, I'm glad to hear it because obviously when I began the channel, it was kind of like an atheist channel. Uh, but I don't like to feel like I am beating a dead horse, right? So I'll make a video like I made the last video I just put out about human rights. That's kind of an atheist video, like my old style of videos. You know, it's like, yes, atheists can talk about human rights, and here's why. But so when something like that comes up, I'll talk about it. But I'm not going to do another argument about some cosmological argument, or I'm not going to do another video about like the problem of evil because I don't want to just talk about things for the sake of talking about them. That's why I've kind of moved more into philosophy rather than just skepticism and atheism. And I really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed talking about ethics and meta-ethics. I've enjoyed talking about veganism. I've enjoyed talking about free speech and all these kinds of things. I've really enjoyed it. But again, I know that's not what you signed up for. The problem is, right? I'd like to stay true to what people originally wanted the channel to be, but at the same time, if I've got nothing to say on something, then I'm not going to talk about it. You know, if I feel like I've covered a topic or done a topic, then I'm not going to talk about it. So the channel is going to expand into just philosophy in general, and I'm really eager to talk more about animal rights and veganism. It's become so important to me, but I want to be tactful about it because again, even if I said, you know what, screw it, no, I care too much about this, I'm just going to start talking about veganism all the time. That wouldn't even be the best way to do it because people would leave, people wouldn't be interested, and I wouldn't have the audience anymore to actually talk about these issues that I find really important. Like it'd actually be more productive to talk about it less, if you see what I mean. So I'm just still trying to kind of navigate that. Um, but that's why I've started to do some kind of patron polls and Twitter polls and things and see what kind of material people want to see because I'm never quite sure what I should be doing. Um, okay, the second question from Tal Orbach, which I didn't answer earlier on Patreon, was in some of your veganism conversations, I felt like you were being extra cautious with the other person's feelings to the point of not calling them out on logical inconsistencies and BS argument. Most prominent of which was Armin Navabi's "I don't like the vegan movement strategy, so I eat meat." I want to hear your thoughts on this. Okay, so I don't think that I'm uh where am I looking? Right. Yeah, I don't think that I do like care too much about people's like emotional response to the arguments. Like if you watch my conversation, the podcast episode with Matt Dillahunty, and we talked about veganism, like I knew it at the time, and I watch it back and I feel the same thing. Like I I was thinking like Matt is the kind of guy who does the atheist experience, right? He sits on the phone and he just has this kind of cold rationality, and he's empathetic. He's a really nice guy. Um, but if he's making a point, right, and someone makes a bad point, he's not going to let that empathy get in the way of making the point, right? And I did the same thing back to Matt. I was just like, here's my point, and this is what I'm saying. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. So I actually kind of disagree with the question. With Armin Navabi, which if you haven't seen it, we had a conversation here. It wasn't on my channel; it was on the Atheist Republic channel. We talked about veganism, and I was kind of soft, but when I argue softly, it's not out of respect for someone's feelings. It's not I don't want to hurt their feelings. Like I really like Armin. He's a very good friend of mine, and we've had some arguments in the past. Right? He's the kind of guy that we can start shouting at each other. We did so after the event in London. I think we were somewhere or other, or sometime around the London event. We were in a room somewhere, and we were just like shouting at each other about chickens, right? And arguing about chickens and can chickens get depressed and what's the like social, and it was really really intense. And then when it was over, it was just like, yeah, cool. Anyway, and we moved on, right? That's what I love about the guy is that you can get really intense and argumentative. And if anybody walked in, they'd think that we hated each other the way that we were arguing. But then immediately you just snap out of it and it's fine and we're friends. Um, so what I mean to say is that I'm really not afraid, right, to risk upsetting Armin with an argument. So where I was arguing softly, that would have been more of an argumentative strategy rather than civility or whatever you'd call it. So it's like I think you're more likely to be convinced if we kind of take the soft route, if we take the slow route in and kind of if I try to lead you to the conclusion using your own logic, right, rather than kind of jumping in, and that might come across as me holding back, but it's not for that reason. So you don't need to worry about that. Like, believe me, I am not going to hold back on an opinion. The fact that I was like willing to sit in front of, I was so lucky with some of the guests I've had, like Peter Singer, for instance. This man founded the animal rights movement. This man has so much to be thanked for in terms of animal suffering. Like he's probably single-handedly reduced animal suffering more than any other thinker or philosopher in the past 100 years. And like for me to sit in front of him and just say, no, 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 I think you're wrong, and here's why. Like that's audacious. Like who the hell am I to say something like that to Peter Singer? But like my channel and my ideas and my opinions, that the whole point of doing this is like I put videos out with my opinions on them, right? And so I figured like it doesn't matter who they are. I'm going to have to just put the opinion out. And if they don't like it, then they've misunderstood what the channel's about. So I really don't mind doing so. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about people being like, about me being like holding back for someone's emotional security or whatever. That wouldn't happen. Obviously, there are times when you don't have the argument. Like if somebody is in a very vulnerable state or something, or is very upset, like don't go up to them and say, haha, let's talk about why God doesn't exist and you should stop crying, like get over it. It's like that would be ridiculous. What I mean to say is that if we're having the conversation, then I won't hold back. But if someone says, I don't want to have this conversation right now, can we stop it? Then I'll stop it, right? That's kind of the rule of thumb, I suppose. Um, but it's interesting how far we take that, because it's like if someone was a racist or something and you're having a conversation, they said, listen, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. You'd probably turn around and say, well, I don't care, right? You're a racist. We're going to sort this out. Um, but by that logic, the same thing should apply to talking about things like veganism, for instance, right? Because even if you don't agree with veganism, like if it is correct, let's say, then speciesism is as dangerous, probably far more dangerous than racism, at least in its current form, because racism is horrible and pernicious and societally damaging. But speciesism is responsible for just direct slaughter of like 10 times the actual population of human beings, like every year. It's like on another level, right? So it should be, if someone says, oh, I don't really want to talk about veganism right now, it's going to upset me, like we should maybe have the same approach of like, well, like I don't care, like this needs to be sorted out. But again, it's difficult to find a balance there. And it's very difficult to do so without people calling you a preachy vegan. Like, of course, if you become convinced of veganism, you become a preachy vegan for the same reason that, like, you'd be a preachy abolitionist or a preachy like whatever. If you're convinced of some moral cause, if you're part of the civil rights movement, you'd be preachy about it. If you're fighting for human rights, you'd be preachy about it. If you're a feminist, you'd be preachy about it because you think like this is important. This is ethically obvious. Like how we just need to let people know about this. Like I think that when people call you preachy, it's just a way to because they're attacking the method, not the argument, right? So it's like if someone ever says to me, "Oh, you're being a bit too preachy," it's like, okay, tell me something about the argument. I don't care. Like, I'm not doing this for my sake. I don't care what you think of me. I care what you think about the argument. I care what you how the way that you're kind of treating the animals. That's what matters. So yeah, I don't know. It's a hard thing to navigate. I like the fact that some people in the comments here have seen about like I can see you guys are reacting quite positively to the podcast with Drew and Steve, but also to the idea of getting my tutor on or talking to Philosophy Tube. That's good to see. I don't want to. I don't want to lose any questions here. Oh, okay, Ella has asked. Ella from the train, I believe, has asked, why do you think people's rationality extends as far as veganism and then transforms into a testosterone fueled outrage? Is it just unwillingness to give up meat or something deeper? Um, do you mean as in like the kind of the angry response to the vegan uh, argument when people like start getting very like macho about it and talking about how much they need meat, they need to be strong, this kind of stuff? Will get very annoyed and upset about it. What do I think that is? I do think I think maybe it is on a surface level just unwillingness to give it up. It's like it's inconvenient. That's the thing. It's like it's so inconvenient. It's like for God's sake, why did you have to tell me about that? It's kind of like I don't know if there was a massive spider or something on the ceiling, and I don't like spiders very much. So like if I spot it, then I'm gonna want to get rid of it. I want to put a cup over it and move it outside or something. And it's like I know it's not going to harm me. Like I'd rather just not known that it was there, even though it's still going to be there. I'd just rather not known because like it's just a massive inconvenience. It's the same thing with veganism. It's like people are like, for God's sake, like okay, fine, yeah, right, good point, but I'd rather not know about it. But now that they do, it's like you've got three options. You either act in accordance with it, you either come up with an argument against it, which is very difficult to do, or you just kind of get angry and ignore it. Right? That's the easiest option. Is the last one. Right? Um, the best thing to do, of course, is the first one, is to accept the logic where it leads. If you can argue against it, I think you can argue against it. Someone like Armin Navabi is a good example. I think he's wrong. I think he's still contributing to a horribly dangerous industry, but at least we'll argue about it. And I know that if I convince him logically that veganism is the right thing to do, he'd probably do it because he's that kind of person, right? So my problem with him is a philosophical one, right? The real problem, the difficult problem, are the people who you could convince them logically that it is the right thing to do, and they still don't do it, right? That's a different kettle of fish, right? And I'm pretty sure that Steve Woodford, Rationality Rules, falls into that category, right? We're very good friends, and we talk about this a lot. And on a number of occasions, he said to me, "Listen, I know it's not moral to eat meat, to eat animal products." He's a vegetarian, right? He says he knows it's not moral to eat cheese, but he just hasn't done it yet. And that's a kind of like, so you see where the argument leads, but you're not taking it. I've always been very frustrated with him, and I remember asking him recently in London, um, why aren't you vegan yet? And he turns around and says, "Well, why don't you give all of your money to charity?" Because like there's always like these, and the point being that there are these kind of ethical, and that wasn't a two quoque fallacy. That wasn't him like saying, "Well, you have to tell me why you don't do this." But he just said it's for the same reason, Alex. He was like, it's a psychological thing, right? You recognize that it would be more ethical to give more money to charity, but we don't take that to its logical extreme. I happen to think that's different because with charity, it's like it's on a curve. It's not like give away all your money, that's the answer. You need to find some kind of rational line. With veganism, it's very binary. It's just like stop consuming animal products, right? Just stop eating them. That's it. Stop buying them and eating them. Obviously, there are some fuzzy lines, but like it's a lot more simple. That's why I think it's different, and it's easier for me to say to Stephen, if you're convinced of this argument, stop eating it, than it is for him to say, if you're convinced that charity is a good thing, then give all of your money to charity. But that's the difficult thing. That is an example of the kind of unwillingness that I think is apparent in most people who've considered the vegan argument logically and rationally and to a great extent, but haven't adopted it. I think that's what it is. Um, although in some cases, you do get the Armin Navabis of the world who say, "I'm not a vegan," and they can actually justify why not. Like they have an argument, and at the very least, you know that they would adopt the vegan lifestyle probably. Although even with Armin, like I don't know, we like I remember we were talking about suffering, and I brought up milk and said, you know, but Armin, like, do you consider the amount of suffering that goes into milk? And he goes, yeah, that's why I don't have milk. I was like, you don't have milk? He was like, yeah, yeah, no, I don't. And I was like, oh, that's great. Yeah, oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Yeah, no, I was making assumptions. My bad. Um, and then a bit later, he goes on and picks up like this bit of chocolate and goes to eat it, and I say, Armin, that's got milk in it, and he goes like, oh yeah. Well, I mean, like, I don't drink milk. And I'm thinking, okay, so I see what's happened here. What's happened here is you don't drink milk because you don't like milk. You just don't like drinking it. And now when I've argued that you shouldn't be having milk, you turn around and said, well, I don't. When that's not actually an ethical choice. That was just like because you then just ate a bit of chocolate that has milk in it. So even in Armin, it's still there. But so yeah, even with people like Armin, there is just this level of unwillingness. It's like he recognizes the argument as it applies to milk, but will still eat milk chocolate, right? That can't be described really as anything other than unwillingness, and that's a pretty big problem. But I don't really know what you can do about it with those people. It'd be so good to have them on our side. If you see him arguing about like ask him about reform in Islam and just watch him go. It's amazing to watch. He is such a powerful speaker. If he was arguing for animal rights, he'd be unstoppable. Um, yeah, it would be pretty crazy. Like I've seen, he goes crazy about it, talking about how like the idea that we should reform Islam is silly. It's like yeah, you reform it by getting rid of it, by people not believing it anymore, by destroying it, you know, killing the ideology. And I remember just I did this on stage actually to him. I turned around and said, "Well, listen, Armin, this is exactly the same as when I say that we need to stop eating animals, and you start arguing for a reformist approach because you're worried about scaring people off. You're worried about like harming the actual movement and causing more suffering to animals." I'm like, this is exactly the same thing as when people say that we need to reform Islam because they're scared of scaring people off or coming off as too extreme. And we kind of had it out on stage in London, and the event was filmed. It was the footage I think is kind of being edited. It's on some hard drive somewhere. Someone's got it, and but I'll link you guys to it when it's available. It's very funny to watch. It was a really great panel. We were in London. It was a panel with myself, Rationality Rules, Genetically Modified Skeptic, Armin Navabi, Viduvids, Mimsy, like so many people, all in one room. It was crazy. That was the time when I meant to get a train to Oxford from Oxford to London, which is 1 hour on the train. Right, so I go to the train station, 1 hour trip, get off at London Paddington, managed to get on the wrong train and end up in Birmingham because I was like just engrossed in whatever I was doing on my phone or something. I didn't notice the stops flying by, and before I knew it, I was on a direct train all the way up to Birmingham. So I went to Birmingham and then back down again. And if you don't know UK geography very well, what that means is that like on the map, here's Oxford where I was starting, right? And I checked on my phone to see where I was. Here's Oxford on the map. London is like here on the map, and the little blue dot that was me was like up here, just going up towards Birmingham. And I was like, oh dear. So I had to come all the way down again. I was very late, showed up to the panel late. It was very funny. Um, I would recommend watching that when the footage comes out because it was quite fun when I finally made my appearance. Um, okay, let me see here. Luke Ellison, hello, thank you for being here. Thanks for the support. Do you think Earthling Ed is too strict with his definition of vegan, saying you can't call yourself a vegan if you eat honey, and that vegans don't ride horses, etc.? Is he turning away potential vegans? Well, we kind of were just talking about this. I don't think he's too strict. I think he might be too strict with the honey thing, just because I don't actually know how much suffering goes into the production of honey. He seems to be convinced that bees can feel pain, and if they can, then honey is still quite dangerous. People say that they make it anyway. It's not really true. It's like when people say that cows make milk anyway. We're just kind of taking it. It's not. It doesn't really work like that. Um, so that would be the dispute that I'd have with the honey thing. It wouldn't be like you're being too strict. It'd be like you might be philosophically wrong. But if he's correct on the philosophy there, then absolutely not. I don't think he's being too strict. Like the idea that vegans won't ride horses, right? Like yeah, I mean, of course they wouldn't because vegans are against the unnecessary suffering of animals. Not obviously not all horses, like people say, like horses can be like pets and you ride them as, but I'm talking like commercial riding, that kind of stuff. Like I went to Italy recently and saw some horses kind of pulling around carriages, and the guys actually had whips. They weren't using them, but they had actual whips, and they stood and the horses pulling the carriages. And I thought to myself, like, God, that's disgusting. And like, yeah, of course, are vegans against that, right? Why would like, just because one ends up as food, just because like a cow being tortured ends up as food, but a horse being tortured ends up like pulling a carriage, right? Like, it's not that veganism isn't about food. It's not about like the end. It's about the suffering of the animal, right? So if it causes suffering to an animal, then yeah, we don't do it. And to say like it's too strict to say don't get a horse and carriage or something, or don't wear leather, don't wear animal products either. Like, that's too strict. Yeah, I get don't eating it, but it's really strict to say you shouldn't even wear it. Well, it's like it's the same principle, right? We're just applying it consistently. So you say, could that turn away potential vegans? Well, I mean, oh, yes, but only to the same extent that when you tell them that they're not allowed to have a steak, that might turn away potential vegans, right? You could say, like, if you said to potential vegans that it's okay to eat steak, then they'd be more likely to go vegan. Well, yeah, because they'd be more likely to go vegan then, because they wouldn't be going vegan, right? They don't have to do the hard work. We have to be honest, right? Obviously, we don't want to make it seem harder than it is, and we want to make sure that people know how easy it is to go vegan. But we've got to be honest, right? We've got to say, like, I hate to have to say it to you, mate, but no, no steak, no eggs, no milk, no horse riding, no horse and carriage, no elephant riding in Thailand, no ivory piano keys, none of that, uh, we've got to be honest about it. And there is no good reason to say that one of those types of suffering is worse or more important than another. There's no good reason to say that the suffering of a cow that ends up as beef is more important than the suffering of a horse that's pulling the carriage, or being whipped, or whatever it is. Like, again, equal consideration, regardless of species and regardless of situation. Morally speaking, that is the basis of veganism, so it has to apply consistently. Um, Let me see here. Have you had any further thoughts regarding antinatalism, in terms of pleasure and suffering? Also, would you allow anyone to call you Yo Connor? Well, to answer the questions in reverse, you can call me anything you like. I don't really mind. I might not respond to it. That's the only downside. But you can label me whatever. Believe me, I've had every label under the sun. Like, I'm on YouTube, right? I make a living on the internet. I'm sure that if you can think of some kind of funny or rude or insulting nickname or whatever it is, any kind of nickname, I've probably already heard it. Although I haven't heard Yo Connor before. Besides the point. Okay. Antinatalism. Not really. I want to read David Bennett's book. It's called Better to Never Have Been, because I used to misunderstand the antinatalism argument. I used to think the antinatalists said that there's more suffering than there is pleasure in someone's life, therefore they shouldn't live it. That's not actually, at least Bennett's version, that's not the antinatalist argument. The antinatalist argument is, even if there's far more pleasure, even if a life is 99% pleasure and 1% pain, it's still not worth living, because not having pleasure is not a bad thing. That is neutral. That doesn't mean anything. But not having pain is actively a good thing. So if someone was never born, yes, they would have missed out on that 99% of life pleasure. But like, it's not a bad thing when pleasure doesn't occur. It's just like, whatever. You don't like you're not sad about the fact that there's no pleasure on Mars when there could be so many Martians having a good time. Like, it's not a bad or evil thing that there's no pleasure on Mars. This is an example Bennett gives. However, it is a good thing that there's no suffering, right? So that person, before they were born, by not allowing them to be born, yes, they missed out on all the pleasure, but that doesn't matter. But they also missed out on that tiny amount of suffering. But that suffering actually does matter. So he calls it like the asymmetry of pleasure and pain. Um, that has to be the crux of the antinatalist position, and it's going to require a lot of thought. My instinct is to reject it, is to say that if it's a good thing that there's no suffering, it has to be a bad thing that there's no pleasure, especially because I see them as kind of on the same plane. But I'd need to read his book before I can really dig into it. To be honest, I'd like to have him on the podcast, but I recognize he doesn't really like doing that kind of thing. If he did do the podcast, he wouldn't want to show his face, and he probably wouldn't even accept. I'm not sure. I know he did Sam Harris's podcast, but I feel like that's a rarity, um, because from what I've read about him, he likes to be very, very private. He doesn't like to speak about his private life. He doesn't like his face to be public, anything like that. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see where we go with that. Let me see here. Why don't we do all these things? Yeah, Ellie, you make a good point. I mean, so there are many binaries. When it comes to like environmental stuff, again though, you're giving some examples here about like palm oil and um, fast fashion. Yeah, actually, no, I suppose that would, because I was gonna. Well, no, it's tricky, right? Because if you're talking strictly about the environmental impact, and I know that the environmental impact also affects like animals who live there, so it is vegan in that respect. But if you're just making an environmental argument, it's similar with like the charity thing. It's not really feasible. I guess it's possible, and you can make this point, but I don't think it's feasible to tell people to never ever drive or never get on a bus or never get on a plane, like ever. That would be like that would be unreasonable, right? Like that would actually be quite an unreasonable thing to do. The best you can say is to like minimize it as much as possible, but like it's difficult to see exactly how that would play out, exactly where that line's drawn, right? You can't just say stop getting on planes, like never get on a plane, right? However, with the veganism, like you can just say stop eating animal products, right? That's a real binary. And again, there are gray areas, I suppose, but like those gray areas tend to be like philosophical hypothetical scenarios in which you have to make a choice between two things or something like that. But like the base principle that you should just stop eating animal products is a very simple one. With the environmental impact of um, transport, for instance, it's not as simple as just saying, "Hey, stop using transport." Right? That's why I don't think it falls in the same kind of sense into this very, very binary um, uh, equation, calculation, whatever you want to call it. You may be able to tell, ladies and gentlemen, that I am quite tired at the moment, which isn't regular, right? Every time I upload a video, people seem to say like, I don't know, I just have bags under my eyes all the time, and in videos, people like I can't upload a single video these days without somebody saying, "Are you getting enough sleep?" Yeah, I'm getting enough sleep. I'm fine. I'm doing all right. But today I am actually quite tired. I was up until some stupid hour in the morning, something like 5 or 6 a.m. Um, so I haven't even been up particularly long, but I'm glad to be here. Uh, Let me see. Kelly again. Hello. I think it's a binary thing. There are two basic pleasures in life: food and sex. Not everyone has access to sex, so I think people don't like to have their pleasures questioned ethically. Of course. Well, that's the thing, right? It's like it's a big deal. Like eating is a huge. There's a good book called "Eating Animals: Should We Stop?" by Jonathan something or other. He's the author that wrote the book. Uh, what's it called? Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. It was that novel that came out years ago, made into a film with Will Smith. He wrote this book about eating animals, and he does it in a very kind of narrative way. He's a novelist, right? And so he wrote this book about like storytelling and things, and how like eating is very sociable. He tells stories about how like eating is a communal activity. It's more than just putting food in your mouth. Like it's a very important part of people's lives. And so you're right, Kelly. Like it's not easy to ask people to just get rid of it, right? It's not an easy thing to do, but it is a feasible thing to do. It is a reasonable thing to do, a rational thing to do. It's actually possible and feasible. So there are things like with the environmental argument, with the idea of just stop using transport altogether. Not only would that be like an uneasy thing to try and tell people, it would be unreasonable, right? It would be unfeasible. But with the vegan argument, you've only got one of these problems, that it's difficult to tell people about it or difficult to argue it because people are going to be upset by it. But it's not unreasonable. It's not unfeasible. It's perfectly fine. Um, but the thing is, like, I understand it, right? Because what 6 months ago, just over 6 months ago, I was eating KFC like regularly. That's the thing. Like, I totally understand the mindset, right? I've been there, so it's very difficult for me to I don't know, because that makes me think that I shouldn't be able to go to non-vegans and say, I can't believe that you're not vegan. Like, come on, this is an ethical obligation because 6 months ago I was doing it. It seems hypocritical, but like, it's like I'd compare it to someone who gives up smoking and realizes how amazing it is to not be smoking anymore, how much better it is for their health, and then turns around to people and says, "You guys need to stop smoking, really, really, really." And they're like, "Ah, screw you! You were smoking like a month ago." It's like, yeah, that's the point. Like, I gave up because I had this realization. I want you to have this realization with me. Um, but like having said that, like what I mean to say is that I understand the psychology, right? I understand the psychology of that kind of stuff. In the same way that a smoker who gives up smoking would have every moral right to turn around and tell other people that they should stop smoking, even though he used to smoke, because he's now had this moral awakening, or medical awakening, health awakening. But at the same time, he could understand the psychology of the smoker, right? He could say, listen, I understand why you're smoking. I understand addiction. I understand how it feels. But not only is it like, despite the fact that I understand that, I'm telling you to give up. It's like, because I understand that, that's why I want to be the one to tell you to stop. It's the same thing. It's like, when people say you can't tell people to go vegan because you've only been vegan for a few months, you used to eat meat, you're a hypocrite. It's like, no, it's because I used to eat meat and then had this life change that I have the experience to share with people and to help guide people through the journey themselves. Um, yeah, I it's a difficult thing to get people to agree with, but I think it just has to be done. And I'm still trying to navigate what is the best approach. Like, is it the kind of firebrand, put it in your face, you've got no choice but to consider it, and because it's a fairly easy ethical question, if it's in your face, then you have no choice but to kind of make the realization. Um, but how good are people, even if something's put right in front of their face, of kind of pushing it away? Maybe a better approach is to take it more slowly. Like, I'm still trying to work that out. I'm not entirely sure. But however it's being done, it's getting better. It's growing. There are more and more vegans. More and more people are listening to people like Ed, who recently reopened Unity Diner. He runs and owns, co-founds, um, a vegan restaurant in London, and they were open for a while and they closed down because they moved to a bigger location. They've just taken over what was a rib restaurant. It used to serve ribs. They took it over, and it's now a massive vegan restaurant, much bigger than the previous site. Like, it's going in the right direction. Like, people are beginning to pick this up, and it's not as hard as people thought. Like, there are vegan restaurants in London now, right? It, it's good because now people, like, they don't have to be convinced to make this horrible ethical sacrifice. They can just go like, oh, I kind of want to try out this new restaurant, and they go and try it, and before you know it, like, they're like, veganism is actually can be quite nice. There's great food here. It's probably not that difficult. Let me ask the chef what's in these things, like learn some of the ingredients and stuff, and then I think, I'll give it a try. It no longer has to be this horrible sacrifice. Think about people like Peter Singer, right? In the 1970s, giving up animal products. In the 70s, imagine how difficult that would have been. There's no vegan options, there's no vegan aisle, and like crazy soy milks. You can't go to a cafe and ask for soy milk. They'll think, what the hell are you talking about? It's a bit like when I went to France recently. France are not good with veganism, right? Where they do veganism, they do it very well. But like, you go into a restaurant and you say, listen, I don't have meat or dairy, and the waiter, on at least one occasion, looked at me and said, "What is wrong with you?" Because it's not something that they're kind of used to. Um, it would have been like that, but like everywhere in the 70s, and people like Peter Singer, so much respect for managing to navigate that. You know what I mean? Like, even though the options weren't there, and now most of us live in a society where it's considerably easier than it was for people like him, and so it's like we have no excuse. But I recognize that it's not easy everywhere. Like I say, when I went to France, I realized how difficult it can be, but it is possible, right? And some people might have to work harder than others. That's not fair. But like, in the same way, life isn't fair. Like, it sucks to think that some people should have it easier going vegan because of where they live, but just think of something on a similar ethical plane. If this was to do with like slavery or something, and someone says it's not really fair, it's way easier for the people who live in the city to not have slaves than the rural people to not have slaves. It's way harder to not have slaves in a rural population. It's like, yeah, no, you're right, but tough. Like, we've made an ethical principle here, right? We've got to follow it. Um, but I do recognize it's not as easy for other people. And I think people should be more congratulated when they manage to navigate that. But yeah, like think about that. Like Peter Singer in the 70s giving up animal products, and here we are today with massive vegan restaurants all over the capital, vegan options on Deliveroo, and access to supermarkets with anything you could imagine, any vegan recipe you could ever want, and it's just like, man, it's gotten so easy. We are in the best time to go vegan, and it's only going to get easier because we go vegan, right? It's a circle. What's the opposite? What's the opposite of a vicious circle? You know, it's like it's easier to go vegan when there are more vegan options, right? There are more vegan options when the demand increases, and the demand increases when it becomes easier, right? So it becomes easier, so people buy the products. People buy the products, the demand goes up, so it gets even easier because there are more products. That means even more people go vegan, and it goes round and round and round. Positive feedback loop, exactly. That's what's going to happen, and that's what is happening. But it does take, right? Like obviously that will happen overall, but in order to get that kind of thing going, there need to be people who make the sacrifice, who it's not just like, oh, it's easy enough to do it now, I'll go ahead. It's like, I don't care how easy it is, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be part of the movement that gets it going. Think about that, right? It's not going to take long. Like veganism is the definitive ethical question of our time, and it's not going to be long before most people are probably on one side about this. At the very least, they're going to be on the animal welfare side, and it's probably it might be like 100 years, you know, before people stop eating meat altogether. And here we are, right, in this perfect opportunity to actually be a part of the movement that causes that change. One of the biggest ethical changes history will have ever known, ever, right? For the history of humanity, people have been exploiting and torturing and killing animals. And we are part of the generation that could bring it to an end. Think about that as an opportunity, right? It's amazing, right? It's not too early. Like 100 years ago, you could have been a vegan, but you know it's never actually gonna. It's not time yet. You know, society's not going to actually accept it, but like you can feel it, right? You can feel it now when you look at how society is at the moment. We have an actual opportunity to be a fundamental driving part, to be able to say in the future, I made a sacrifice that caused the greatest ethical revolution that history has ever known, or one of the greatest at the very least. Like, you'd be a fool not to take it. Imagine if you had an opportunity to be part of the movement that abolished slavery. If you had an ability to be part of the movement that gave women the right to vote. If you could really have played a pivotal role, well, it's like you have that opportunity now, right? I can't remember who the quote was, but someone said, if you want to know what your position on slavery would have been in the 18th century, um, don't think about you in the 18th century. Don't look at that. Look at your position now on animal rights. And I think that's absolutely true. The two are very analogous in that respect. People often get offended when you make a comparison between things like slavery or racism or sexism and speciesism. But that itself, the fact that people get offended by that, is just indicative of how little people understand the true nature of the suffering involved with the exploitation of animals. Um, where are you on climate change? I mean, with scientific consensus, as per usual. But I'm not an expert. I don't know enough about it to make videos about it. For instance, I wouldn't argue about it. Um, that's why I wouldn't make a like. I will. There are things that you have an opinion on. Like if I walk into a car dealership and ask the guy what the best one to get is. Like I bought a bass guitar recently. I'm a guitarist. I know a lot about guitars. Don't know much at all about bass guitars. I wanted to get. I was thinking of getting like a Squire precision bass, which I know the Fender precision basses are good, so I thought I'd get it. And the guy in the shop said, "Listen, man, you should try this bass. Give it a go." This seems like a weird example, but bear with me. And he says, try this bass. He told me why it was good. He told me what was better, and I was like, you know what you're talking about. Sure, I'll get this one. So I did. Now, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, right? This guy knew what he was talking about. I trust his expertise, and so that affected my life and the way I live my life. But what I wouldn't be able to do is produce a video telling you why this bass guitar is the best one that I could have got, right? I can't actually argue the case. I'm just trusting the consensus. The same thing with global warming. Um, I just I always accept the science wherever it leads, even if I can't argue that case myself because I'm not well versed enough to do so. Um, Right, but okay, so yeah, well, okay, so that's about an hour. This has been fun because I know that there's only a few. Like, I think there's only like 16 of you actually here watching at the moment. It looks like. Um, so there's not like that many, but especially even just compared to last time, there's more of you, and it's been fun. I'm glad that there have actually been people watching. And like I say, the link here will be available. Like, I'm just going to leave it up on Patreon, and the video is just going to be unlisted after it's finished processing by YouTube, so you can watch this at any point. So I'm gonna be doing these every 3 months. I think the next one that I'll be doing will probably it will be after I've started the second year of university. I move into university on the 10th, so I'm back at uni very soon, which means again I don't know how that's going to affect the channel. I'd like to think that I'll still be able to make some videos, but you guys were with me last year. You guys who were with me last year will know it kind of the quantity of videos kind of went down a bit, but I was still able to make things here and there, do some podcast episodes, that kind of stuff, write some articles. So I'll still be active and engaged. But do bear in mind that I'm moving back to uni in 4 days. So we'll see how that goes. But again, second year, because I've got to choose my papers now. Last year it was just like introductory stuff to like philosophy, ethics, that kind of stuff. This year I've got to choose my papers, so I get to do practical ethics. So I get to study about veganism and abortion and nuclear deterrence and that kind of stuff. That's all part of practical ethics. I'm going to be doing like meta ethics, so really getting into the grit of the stuff that I've talked about on the channel. What I'm saying is it's getting more like specified, right? I'm not just learning about moral philosophy or like free will like we were doing last time, but like I get to really choose what to do now. I'm doing a paper on uh, what else am I doing? Oh, theory of politics. So I'm going to be doing a paper on political theory, which will be an interesting. But what I'm saying is like, even if the quantity of the videos goes down, don't worry. Like we're cooking up some good stuff. Hopefully, by the time I've finished, I will have some pretty decent theoretical knowledge on which to. I already think that even just after studying this for a year, if you look at my videos, I like to think that the references, the citations, the books, the theoretical underlying of the arguments I'm making are becoming more frequent, and I'm able to do that because now I'm more aware of some of the literature surrounding the issues I'm talking about. So hopefully that will increase. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but yeah, I'll be moving back soon. But that said, I think I am going to sign off. So I'll see you all again soon. Thanks for being engaged on Patreon. The fact that you're here means you're quite engaged, but also people who are like commenting on posts and things. Even if I don't always respond, I see every single one of them because they come through in the emails. And I really do appreciate the engagement and the support, of course. Like I say, if you're here, that means that you are pledging to support the channel monetarily, which, man, I wouldn't have this office. Like, you guys paid for this foam, right? You paid for the mic and the laptop and all of this, but you also paid for the bloody foam. You paid for this adapter cable. You paid like everything about what I'm doing, everything about this place, everything about the effort I'm putting in has come from you. So I can't thank you enough. And yeah, it's been fun. I will see you all soon, I'm sure. And if you haven't seen the latest video, I uploaded one just yesterday, so check that out. But yeah, cheers for being here, guys. I'll see you soon.